Hi everyone, I'm so glad you could join me for today's bake along. Now, this is a bit of a different recipe because I'm not actually putting anything in the oven today. I am demystifying pie dough. Have you ever struggled with getting a pie dough that is easy to roll, is tender, flaky, but yet holds in the weight of a really good pie filling? I've got the recipe for you, and I'm going to walk you through all the whys and hows behind making the flakiest butter pie dough. Making a beautifully tender, flaky pie dough does not have to be complicated. And I think the key is teaching you how to make it in positives. Too often we're taught how to make pie dough in negatives. Don't overwork the dough. Don't let the butter get warm. Don't. And what do? We don't end up making it. This is going to convince you. This is my signature recipe I have been making for at least 10 years, probably a lot more. And I stick with it. It is now my go-to pie dough recipe. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my measured flour. I'm making this in a stand mixer. Feel free to use a pastry blender if you'd rather do it by hand. And that tool is right here. And it has the multiple wires to it, so it really helps work the butter in. If you're trying to do it with two butter knives, it will take you a fair bit longer. You can also use a food processor, but that's the one exception to my little step-by-step. It's got a separate rule to it. When I get to that stage, I will let you know. So let me line up the bowl properly here. The flour's in the mixer. I do add a little bit of sugar, a tablespoon of sugar, not for sweetness, but just to contribute ever so slightly to the interruption of the protein bonds in the flour when it works. Because what you want with a pie dough is something that can hold the weight of a heavy filling. You're gonna put 6 apples in there with sugar and all sorts of toppings or whatever fruits you're gonna make if you're doing a fruit pie. It has to be able to have enough structure to hold the weight, but you don't want it to be tough or heavy. You want it to be nice and flaky. You do season a pie dough with salt, a full teaspoon, and this makes a pie dough then that can be also used for savory applications. Now I'll give that just a quick little stir just to combine the salt and sugar. Nothing remarkable happening here. There we go, that was thrilling. But now for my next ingredient, and this is a signature addition of mine. Part of the stress when it comes to making a pie dough is that we've got our dry ingredients, then we're going to add butter. So a lot of fat to coat the flour. The minute we add the water, we want to avoid the flour from hydrating too much. So to do that, I'm using my little bit of insurance here. 3 tablespoons of neutral oil of your choosing. You add that before you add the butter. And that liquid fat, as you mix it around, is going to coat those flour granules. Then you'll add your butter, and you just don't have to worry about the butter. We're gonna talk about the temperature, how much you mix it, and you really don't need to fuss about it. And then when it comes time to add the water, well, you've got so many protections built in. You just add the water and you mix it until it's done. It's like one of those nonna recipes. You mix it until it's done. So now I've just got a little oil there. Work that in. I've got the oil in here. I can add my butter. So I've got my 225 grams. It's unsalted butter because I've already added the salt to the recipe. Now here's the key. You hear, oh, don't you dare let the butter get warm. Put it in the freezer. Use ice cubes with the water. I find it's a good idea to just relax. The first thing I do when I'm making pie dough is I pull out my butter. I cut up the butter into pieces. And by the time I get my flour and other ingredients measured, it's time to add. So I actually let the butter soften a little bit. Just a touch, so it doesn't come from the fridge ice cold. I'll add it all at once to the mixer, and I'll explain this philosophy to you. Theory, philosophy. So I'm letting the butter work in until it breaks down a little bit. So if you were adding ice cold butter to this flour, it's ice cold. It will shatter and break in uneven pieces. And it will also take longer to mix because it's ice cold. And that's where the protein development starts to happen when you're working that flour and the butter's starting to break down. What I find is with slightly softened butter, it takes less time to work and it breaks down more evenly. So you've cut down your prep time and you've got a more even distribution of the butter within your dough. I equate it to the way you spread butter on your toast in the morning. If it's ice cold butter going onto nice warm toast, it shatters and breaks. It's difficult. You poke a hole in your toast and you're grumpy all day because you had not nice toast in the morning. Where if it's slightly softened, it spreads in an even layer easily, and then you're in a good mood all day. Now, what I'm looking for as I'm mixing the flour, so you're too often told, well, don't overmix the butter in here. Well, how do you know if you've overmixed it or not? What I'm looking for is the color transformation of the flour. Right now, I'm mixing this on super low speed. I can actually go one speed up. The flour is still pale white flour color. And outside of the obvious big visible pieces of butter, I can see the butter is still butter colored. When the look is homogeneous, when the flour takes on a butter color, then you know you have your butter worked in. So I think I'll work this up a notch because you don't have to worry about over mixing it. Speed has no consequence. Oh, that brings up my point. Thank you. Speed reminds me of the food processor point I was going to tell you about. If you're making your pie dough in the food processor, please, by all means, do it. You add your ingredients the exact same way. That is the one exception to the rule. You want to pull your butter right from the fridge. And that is simply because of the speed of the blade and the friction it creates can warm up and break down that butter so quickly. All right, we're coming along nicely here. I guess it takes a total of about 2 minutes. It depends on your mixer. I double batch this recipe all the time and then I freeze it. So this recipe that you see, the one below the window here when you hit the more button, is enough for a 2-crust pie. So if you're making an apple pie with a top or blueberry pie with a lattice top, you're all set. If you're making a single crust pie like a pecan pie or a quiche, then you can put one in the freezer. But I like to always have a couple of discs of pie dough in the freezer. And then I thaw them in the fridge overnight before I use them. All right, look at that color. It's even now between the flour and the butter. And the texture has changed so much, but it is harder to read that, isn't it? Is the texture right? Is it too much? I still see some pieces of butter, but it's that even color between the flour and the butter that I know I'm there. So now it's time for the liquid. And this is the next step that we're often given wiggle room. And you know I like to give you wiggle room in a recipe to get creative with flavors, but the technique typically is the technique. And I grew up making pie dough being taught, well, add between 4 and 7 tablespoons of cold water. Well, is it 4? Is it 7? And why 4 or why 7? So I have found with this ratio of recipe, this ratio of ingredients, the flour, the oil, the butter, that I need a 1/4 cup of cool water. The butter is not ice cold, so don't bother with the ice cubes in the water. It's in there and mixes so quickly that you don't have to worry about it. But the last ingredient to add is 2 teaspoons of lemon juice or white vinegar. And this is because acidity, when it comes in contact with flour, makes the protein strands more elastic. And so don't confuse that with stretchy, like when making bread. But what it means is when you roll out your pie dough, it will roll cleanly and easily and hold its shape. And then when baked, won't shrink or slide down the pie plate for you. So I add that combination of the cool water and the lemon juice at once. And now we just simply mix it until it comes together. When it's a dough, it's done. I've converted a lot of people with this pie dough recipe, including my dear friend Courtney, who will just whip up a galette at the drop of a hat now, and she feels so proud because she has a flaky, tender, yet structured pie dough every time she makes her signature galette. All right, now the dough is starting to look a bit shaggy, so you know you're gonna get close, but you keep mixing. Oh, mixer, you're talking to me. It's getting close. And there we go. The dough is in a single piece, well, for the most part. But when you see it completely clean the sides of the bowl, you are done, and you have made a successful pie dough. Turn this out onto my work table. There's not much to do to it at this point. You just divide it in two, top and bottom, shape it each into a ball. And if you know you're making a pie in a round pie plate, well, you shape it into a ball and then flatten it into a disc, like so. If you want to make individual tarts, say you're making butter tarts, and I have a great recipe for butter tarts. You want to shape each portion into a bit of a log, and that way, when it's time to roll your individual tart shells, you divide each of these pieces into 12 and roll them individually. That way you're not re-rolling your pie dough too much. Now, you do definitely want to let this chill and relax. So even just that little time in the mixer has worked the proteins a little bit. And it also, the butter has now softened a bit. So give it 2 hours as a minimum, wrap them, pop them in the fridge, or just put them in the freezer at this point, and then you've got your pie dough ready when you need it. So I hope I've shared enough tips to demystify and encourage you to try making pie pastry from scratch. I know you'll be satisfied with this recipe. You know I've got tons of pies and pie-related recipes right here on the channel. So make this dough, give it a try, and please leave your comments below. It's been a pleasure sharing my fondness for making pie pastry. I'll see you again for another bake-along.